Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. And welcome to this video where we are going to take a look at the results from the June 2024 Community Survey. I think this is a great idea. I don't know of too many companies that have surveys that are this detailed, this frequent, and are completely open to all customers in a business. Now, granted, if you're a global company that has literally millions or even billions of customers, that might not be feasible, but this is really good that OPR still cares what every single individual player thinks and says. So if you didn't have a chance to complete this survey, put it on your calendar to get the next one in January, and make sure that you participate and you give some input and help direct OPR, because they do listen to their players, which, as I said, that's increasingly rare. All right, so this one's going to be unscripted, so there might be some pauses, awkward stumblings, things of that nature. If I do anything like, burp, hiccup, or fart into the mic, I'll edit that part out. But for the rest, this is going to be kind of raw. But I think that's the best way to do this. So without further ado, let's take a look at the survey results. We'll do a little bit of comparing with the previous one, but most of the commentary that OPR provided here on the webpage already does that. So instead, I'm going to look through at the results and just give my 2 bits on what I think this means and where perhaps the game and the hobby are headed from here. So before we even get to the first question, I notice here that the number of responses actually increased. The previous survey only had about 1,200, now we have 1,400. Now, I'm not a big expert on statistics. I don't know what the typical ratio could be expected between players and people who fill out the survey. But if 200 more people filled out the survey, I would say that probably represents many hundreds more who have started playing the game and either didn't know about the survey or just don't want to fill it out, or meant to and forgot the deadline or something like that. But it shows that the game is getting bigger. What I do find kind of surprising, though, is that this number is as low as it is. Given that the Patreon has over 10,000 subscribers, you'd think those folks, if they're given money every month, that they would want to have more of a say than just with their dollars. So again, if you didn't fill it out this time, make a note to yourself to make sure that you get the survey next time it comes around. All right, let's take a look at the first question here. Where do you follow OPR news and content? And not a whole lot changed from last time. Discord and Patreon are still the clear leaders as far as where people go to get all their information, followed closely by the website. Everything else is trailing in a little bit. YouTube's not bad, about 1/3. You've got the newsletters, about 1/3. And the other social media really isn't that big of a deal. Reddit seems to be the biggest one, but X, TikTok, Friends, those seem to be a heck of a lot smaller. So nothing too much has changed here. Now, if we scroll down to this next one, which OPR games do you currently play? Again, not a lot has changed. Grimdark Future tends to be the most popular. I know on my channel I put out a survey asking everybody, what do you prefer? And overwhelmingly it was Grimdark Future. What I do find surprising is that Grimdark Future Firefight is still more than Age of Fantasy. Now, I can understand why, because if you have a Grimdark Future army, you have enough models to play Firefight. Whereas if you want to play Age of Fantasy, you may have to build yourself an entirely new army, and that's a great expense and time for painting and all that kind of thing. So I do get it, but we see here that the science fiction genre is much more popular than the fantasy genre. Now, what is surprising, though, is look at the popularity of Quest. Quest has surged past warfleets, past regiments, and so it is rapidly. It's taking the entire community in a very, very positive way, which is good. I played a couple games of it. It's a lot of fun, especially if you're playing it with a group of good friends and you have a great rapport, lots of jokes. It can be a really fantastic and fun evening. Now, at this point, I'm going to go a little bit off script. I don't have a script. But my question is, why are these graphs not presented from greatest to least? I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I would think when you have a histogram like this, you want to have the most at the top and then descending. Now, I understand on the left there you have all the Grimdark Future, then all the Age of Fantasy. I don't know, why not put both? One side where it's by game and the other one where it's by result, because it would be a lot, I think, more useful to see that curve of where all the games are. Anyways, side note, tangent, done there. It'd be a lot easier to do the analysis that way, at least I think. All right, down here, frequency. How often do we get to play? And again, not too much has changed here. Most folks get to play about once or twice a month. Well, most 30% get to play about once or twice a month. There is still that very tiny sliver that gets to play 3+ times a week. And again, I don't know how you folks do that. I can usually get in 1 game a week, sometimes 2, and partly because I'm filming and putting them up on the channel, but boy, that gets tiring. But I mean, good on you. If you get to play that much and you can keep up with it, more power to you. But for the most part, it looks like folks get to play once or twice a month, some a little more frequently than that, but not a whole lot has changed. Now this one here, very similar to last time, but look how telling that is. 82% play at home, at a friend's home. This game is still in its infancy, and the way that it's spreading is through word of mouth. I don't think that there's a general hostility to one-page rules in local gaming stores, though I have heard some viewers comment that at their gaming store, there are the 40K players and other, more popular gaming systems kind of look down on the one-page rules players. But it's growing, and you'll notice the second one there is game stores, 23% play there. So I think as the game develops, as time goes on, I think that the friend's home will still be the biggest. This game is very much a individual type game. You print your own models, or you use your own kit bashes, or you proxy your own models. You play in your own home. This is a very, very individual, personal kind of game, rather than going mainstream like something 40K is trying to do, where you're going to see everything from lunch boxes to breakfast cereal. And I think that's a good thing. So looks like the home is still the major place where most people play, which means if you want someone to join the hobby with you, best thing you can do is invite them over to your house for a game. Now, if we come down here, community events. And again, I think this matches what the previous question showed. Most people would be interested in a local casual gaming event, a local hobby painting event, a local tournament, although that wasn't the third. Third place was a convention casual. So once again, what we're seeing here is the community, by and large, likes this hobby for the enjoyment, for the casual nature of it. Play games to have fun, beer and pretzels, that kind of thing. Although you can see that there is a sizable portion who would like to do competitive. So local tournaments and competitive, almost 40%. So just shy of half. I think as we see the numbers of people who play the game, fill out this survey, I think we'll see those competitive numbers go up a bit, because the competitive scene is what draws in large numbers of players. At least that seems to be what it did in with Games Workshop, is that's what really drives it. And I'm not saying I want that to specifically to drive it, but competition gets noticed. Like if I walk into a gaming store and there's a tournament, I'll stick around and watch it a little bit, because I can see just how many people are playing this game. Usually the tables will be really well set. They'll be really nicely painted armies. It's a good advertisement for the game, but you have to keep in mind, of course, it's the competitive side of the game. Now, this one I thought was very interesting as well. The majority of players use the official, if you want to call them that, the 3D printed miniatures from OPR that they print by themselves. I mean, I'm starting to sound like a broken record. This game is a very intensely personal, individual, I don't want to say intimate, that's starting to sound a little crazy, but this is a hobby that comes from inside. Like the individual prints the models, paints the models, invites a friend over to play them. This is very much we're growing from within, from individuals who are really invested in this. Now, of course, second place was, of course, using Warhammer miniatures, but given that, myself included, many players of one-page rules migrate over from 40K. When you get tired of the bloat, the updating, the price increases, all of that stuff, you're going to migrate over to one-page rules, but you're not going to ditch all of your models, especially when the game doesn't require it. So it's no surprise that Warhammer Miniatures is second place. It's also, I don't think, much of a surprise that third place is other 3D printed miniatures. That because the game's model agnostic, it allows you to use whatever models you think work best for your army, whichever ones you want to paint, whichever ones you want to play, which means you can see some super customized, really unique looking armies, which is really good. I like that. I do believe that over time we will see that that top bar will probably stay on top. It might start to be challenged by the 3D printed miniatures from other companies, but given the kinds of sculpts and quality that we're seeing coming out of OPR, I imagine what people will want to do instead is use OPR's miniatures, but maybe get them from someone else printing them. Then again, as 3D printers get better, they're also getting cheaper, so there might come a day when those other categories diminish instead. Everyone's printing their own stuff. All right, what do we got next here? How do you usually buy physical miniatures from other brands? Online, game stores, or do not buy the physical miniatures. They 3D print everything. So that's a fairly, I mean, a quarter. That's definitely significant. But yeah, online retailing, because it just makes sense. Your game store, you're stuck with what the game store can order. And even if they special order stuff, that takes time. There's always possibilities of being sold out, shipping delays, all that. People, once you get bit by a bug, you want a particular model, you want a particular army, you don't want to have to wait for it. At least when you buy online, you've got some kind of a guarantee. I mean, if you're buying an STL, you'll get it immediately. If you're buying from Etsy or something like that, you could always get some expedited shipping or something like that. The game store, you can have it in your hand, but only if they stock it. And if they say, well, we're going to have to order it, well, that's no different from you ordering online, only you didn't have to make the drive down to the game store. So that's not much of a surprise, and I imagine the online will continue to dominate, and the game store one, well, it depends. If game stores start becoming 3D printing farms as well as gaming stores, I think they will they'll be okay there. But I think increasingly we're going to see more people buying from online. Of course, I'm not in business, so I'll probably be totally wrong there. Now, this one I found surprising. Are you interested in buying physical minis from One Page Rules? Overwhelmingly, no. People do not want to buy them. Now, 57.9%, that's a lot. However, that's actually down from 6 months ago. The survey 6 months ago, it was 65% said no. Now it's 58% say no. And the slices of the pie for yes, I would be willing to buy them from a physical game store or from some other store, not only games, not from Etsy, but somebody else. Those two slices of the pie actually got quite a bit bigger. So I wonder if as more people come into the hobby, they're the kinds that don't necessarily want to buy a 3D printer. They don't want to produce their own stuff. They like the models, but they don't want to have to get invested in a printer and all of that stuff. And so they're willing to pay a little bit more for someone else who has done it. Now, what's interesting is Only Games wasn't that popular. People would rather buy it from it says some other online store. I don't know which one they'd be talking about there, because if you're not Only Games, you're not Etsy, who else is going to be selling them? So if you know, put that down. I'd be curious. But it looks like while the majority of players are not interested in buying these in a store, the number who aren't interested in buying them in the store is decreasing. So I'll be curious to see in the next 6 months if that changes again. All right, now, if you did buy physical minis, what would you want to buy? And folks are going with what they're comfortable with. Miniatures on a sprue, rather than pre-assembled single piece, or surprisingly, the second most popular is I'm not interested in buying physical miniatures, meaning they're just going to print all their stuff. And I know that when I print my own stuff, because I'm not great at it, I have about an 80% success rate, which, I mean, it sounds decent, but it still means I print a squad of 10, I'm now too short. And I think I would rather have the minis on a sprue, simply because it's easier to keep track of. You can pull out the sprue, take a look at everything, whereas when you get pre-assembled single piece, there's not as much customization. You know, you have to say in advance, I want this model equipped this way, whereas when you get the sprue, you just get all the pieces and you can decide on the spot. You can change your mind halfway through building it, but once you've bought a pre-assembled single piece miniature, you are married to it, unless you want to do kit bashing, but that's easier to do with plastic than with resin, at least 3D printed resin. So it looks like people still like the old-fashioned way of doing things where you buy stuff on a sprue. Now this one also I found interesting. Would you be interested in buying physical books? And about half of folks said yes, the rule books, and a little under half said yes, the lore books, and only a third said no, I'm not interested in buying the physical books. That was actually me in that bottom category. I'm quite happy buying the PDFs on my tablet. I carry my tablet everywhere. I've got it out when I'm playing games. It's great when I'm in work meetings and I get bored. I pull up one of the books and I start reading it, something like that. But I think people, they just like to have that hardcover book. They can mark it, they can bookmark it, dog-ear it. It's much easier. I will say it's easier to search through a hard copy book than a PDF, which is odd because I can actually do a search function on the PDF, but still, sometimes that takes longer than just flipping pages until you get what you're looking for. So I do find that interesting that while people aren't interested in buying miniatures, they are interested in buying rule books. So they're invested in the rule set, they're invested in the lore, but they want to print or acquire their own minis one way or another. So I find that very, very fascinating. Okay, now this question. Do you play Dungeons & Dragons? I don't even know why they need to ask this. I think yes. The ability for, or the fact that people who play tabletop war games also play Dungeons & Dragons. You don't need to think too hard about that one for it to make sense. Especially, I think maybe that accounts for why Quest is so popular. It's a very close bridge between a full game of Age of Fantasy and a game of Dungeons & Dragons. It's like the halfway ground between the two. So 50% say yes, they do, and then the majority say, well, I don't play D&D, but I either want to or I play other role-playing games, maybe Shadowrun, maybe something else. I don't know. I'm afraid I'm not as into the RPG scene as I used to be. Only 13% say, no, I'm really not into to Dungeons & Dragons. Now, when I first saw this question in the survey, I thought, why? And then the second question here made sense. They're looking to branch out. Would you be interested in D&D compatible material from one-page rules? Now, all legal questions about official licensing and making deals with Wizards of the Coast and all that aside, this is just a question. If you could bring the one-page rules world into the world of Dungeons & Dragons, would you be interested? And it looks like of everyone who answered, about half say yes. So we've got the majority would want to do adventures. They want to play in the world. Some just want stats to maybe bring into other adventures or campaigns that they're in. And then 46% are like, no, not interested. Okay, what do we got next here? Now, which armies are the most, popular, or which one are played? And as they point out, and I noticed this without reading the summary at the bottom, Alien Hives has been knocked from first place. The Battle Brothers are now the most frequently played. Now, what's curious is the wording of that question. Which ones do you play? I wonder if they added another question. Which models or which armies do you own and which ones do you play most? Because I got tons of armies, but there's some I seldom play for one reason or another. But anyways, here, this is where I think this question, the data would be better presented as a top to bottom rather than alphabetical, as you can see. That doesn't really help anybody. But Battle Brothers, number one faction, followed very closely by Alien Hives, Human Defense Force, and Robot Legions, which, again, shouldn't be too big of a surprise because those are some of the most popular factions in 40K. And when folks migrate over, they're going to be using the same armies, and so that's why you see it there. Whereas armies like Dark Eldar or Dark Elves, Custodians, Jesters, they're very small because they're small in 40K. And then in the OPR world, Human Inquisition, Infected Colonies, Rebel Guerrillas. I wonder if those are just low because people don't play them because they haven't played them in 40K. Or maybe the setting doesn't really appeal to them. I don't know. If any of you have an idea of why those factions might be so low, let me know. I'd be curious to know. As they did point out, though, the Soul Snatcher cults have become much more popular now that they've started to get their STLs. You're not having to find something, you now have something definite to use. And then over in Age of Fantasy, very similar. Vampiric Undead, number 1, followed by... Oh, I'm sorry, I got it wrong here. The Shadow Stalkers are the ones that had the huge jump here in Age of Fantasy. My mistake. So, number 1, Vampiric Undead, followed by the Saurians, followed, it looks like, next by Ratmen, and then the Human Empire, and everyone else kind of fighting over the pieces from there. So, yeah, Shadow Stalkers make a huge leap now that they're starting to get their own brand new shiny model line, so everyone wants to try those out. That makes perfect sense. What I am very curious is what happens with the Wood Elves here. 12%. At the live broadcast that was done on the day that I recorded this, OPR announced that Wood Elves are going to be the new faction after Shadow Stalkers. I wonder if we'll see the Wood Elves then take a huge jump, just like the Shadow Stalkers did. Now, Warfleets, what I find surprising is the biggest category was Other. So I wonder if this is folks who are playing like narrative games outside the OPR universe. So they're playing Star Wars, they're playing Star Trek, they're playing Battlestar Galactica, they're playing in other worlds but just using the rule set. And then inside the OPR universe, you've got Battle Brothers, Alien Hives, and Human Defense Force. So we're seeing that the stuff people play in Grimdark Future match what they're playing in Warfleets with this very interesting outlier of Other. So for those of you who know what Other is, am I on track by saying it's other IPs that people are wanting to play in the one-page rules rule set, or is it something else? A new question here because of Final Fantasy, Age of Fantasy quests. Which one are the most popular? I don't think it's a surprise at all. It's the fighter. Everyone likes to be a fighter. Plus, if you're new to a game like this, the fighter's always the safest bet. You hit hard, you can take a punch, and it's fairly straightforward. You see bad guys, you run up to them and you smack them. Whereas if you play a more nuanced class, like a bard, like a monk, like a druid, it's a little more difficult to, especially for new players, to understand, okay, how does this guy work? I mean, you're a bard. What do? Beat them with your lute or something like that? So this makes sense, but I wonder if as the game exits the beta and goes into its formal setting, as people play it, as they test out some of these new classes, if we might see more of a dramatic shift once people get comfortable with just being a plain old fighter and want to explore some of these other classes. Now, this is the one question that had me a bit puzzled. So it says the first Grimdark Future faction book we're making will be The Eternal Dynasty. Well, I went and looked at the last survey. The Eternal Dynasty was, I think, 3rd or 4th on the list. They asked, if we make a book, a lore book, which one do you want? Or a faction book, what do you want? Eternal Dynasties was not 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, and yet it's the one that they picked. So when I mentioned, this is why I'm a bit confused. They mentioned they're doing these surveys to see what the customers want, so to speak, but then they don't go with that. Now again, only 1,200 people responded out of 10,000, so maybe that wasn't representative. Also, I could understand why they want their first official faction book to be a unique faction to them, rather than just piggybacking on something else, but that still doesn't explain why they didn't go with the Saurian Starhost. That is a fairly unique faction. The Lizardmen in 40k, they're not in, in Age of Sigmar, they're not in 40k, so it's a unique faction at OPR, and as it was back in January, it's a very popular one here. So I'm a little curious what made them choose Eternal Dynasty, and it makes me wonder, does that mean Starhost will be next, or will they pick 3rd place again? Who knows? Same thing down here. The Age of Fantasy faction book was about the Duchies of Vinci. And Duchies of Vinci in the previous survey were 4th out of 8. And yet they were the one that was picked. Now I imagine that had to do with the Secrets of Tixal campaign and this desire to kind of like put all those ducks in a row and get everyone excited for that. Pick a faction that's unique, pick the one that's going to match this new campaign. Even though it was 4th out of 8, it was at least in the top 5, so maybe that's why they chose it. But looking here, it's a little bit closer between the Ratmen, the Vampiric Undead, and the Saurians. People really seem to like their Saurians. If anyone knows the reason behind that, why Saurians are just super popular, put it in the comments. I'd be curious to know. Okay, so that's the last question. So what I think we can see from here then is oddly enough, there's not that much change. If I were to put these graphs side by side with the ones from January, not a whole lot change. Where it did, it wasn't a huge change. Close your eyes if you get dizzy easily. Like we come up here, Battle Brothers took over from Alien Hives, but just barely, by 5 votes. But still, it took over. I'm sorry, that was Warfleets. There we go. Battle Brothers took over by, okay, much more significant, about 75 votes, a little more. But other than that, a lot of these graphs looked pretty much identical. There were small changes here or there. So I wonder if, one, will OPR continue to do 6-month surveys if there's not a lot of difference between the surveys? If they might just go to once a year where you can see a much more dramatic change. Whether they do or not, I mean, that's totally up to them. And it would be curious, but if every survey looks very similar to the previous one, then, you know, you might be wasting your time having so many of them. But we'll have to see. That's obviously not my call. So let me know what you guys think of this. Do you think these statistics accurately represent what you think the community looks like? Is it what it looks like in your local gaming community or the friends who come and play at your house? Is this 1,400 player sample a good indication of where the hobby stands in terms of who plays what and what people want to do as far as buying models and 3D printing? If not, how do we get more people to fill out this survey? How do we get more people to participate in it? If it is, what kinds of trends do you see? From what I see here, we're going to continue to see more people coming over from other games, wanting to give this a try, more 40K players migrating over, and that will kind of shift this army breakdown here. I think that Age of Fantasy Quest will continue to get more popular. It might even knock fleets down quite a bit, unless there's some kind of new release for fleets or something like that. But at this point, I think I'm just rambling. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Until the next survey 6 months from now, enjoy your painting, enjoy your playing, and as always, keep your dice on the table. We'll see you next time.